I considered turning the phone back on for a second, hoping that maybe I had been dreaming, that maybe I had been sleepwalking. But I wasn't dreaming. I had seen the words on that screen. Can't stop thinking about you, your body. God, I didn't want to stop touching you yesterday. Mark, her fitness trainer. There was a picture of him too, smiling like a man without a single care in the world, shirtless, abs lit up by some gym mirror. Above it, another message. When can I see you again? Don't make me wait too long. The realization sank in like a stone in my stomach, followed by a wave of nausea. It had to be a mistake, a misunderstanding, but it wasn't. I turned off the phone and put it down on the kitchen counter, feeling my pulse pounding in my temples. My hand was shaking. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself down. I couldn't believe what I had just seen. It felt like a bad dream, a nightmare, but it was real. It was happening, and I had no idea what to do about it. I looked around the kitchen, at the dishes on the drying rack, the coffee maker on the counter, the fruit bowl on the table. Everything looked normal, as if nothing had changed. But everything had changed. Everything. 12 years. 12 fucking years. I felt a burning sensation in my chest, a mixture of anger and sadness. All those years we had spent together, all those moments we had shared, all the things I had done for her, all the sacrifices I had made, and this was how she repaid me? This was how she showed her gratitude? I clenched my fists, trying to suppress the urge to scream. I couldn't let her see me like this. I couldn't let her know that I knew. Not yet. I had to think this through, figure out a plan. I looked at the phone again, tempted to turn it on and read more of their messages, to find out how long this had been going on, how deep it went. But I was afraid of what I would find. I didn't want to know. Not now. Not when I was supposed to be getting ready for our trip. Our trip. I felt a bitter taste in my mouth. The trip that was supposed to bring us closer together, to mend the cracks in our relationship. The trip that was supposed to be a new beginning for us. What a joke. I took another deep breath, trying to calm myself down. I had to act normal, at least until I figured out what to do. I couldn't let her see that something was wrong. I couldn't let her suspect that I knew, not until I was ready. I heard footsteps upstairs, coming from our bedroom. She was probably packing her bags, getting ready for the trip. I wondered if she was thinking about him, about their plans, about their future. I wondered if she had ever really loved me, or if it had all been a lie. The footsteps stopped, and I heard her voice calling from upstairs. "Daniel, where are you? Come on, we need to pack these bags." She let out a laugh, a gentle, everyday laugh that she always had when she needed me to stop what I was doing. Now, it was a laugh that made my ears ring. I picked up her phone and put it in my pocket. "Coming?" "Yeah, come on. I need you to make sure the chargers are packed. And, I think we need sunscreen too. Can you pick some up for us before we head out?" Normally, I would have laughed at her being her usual chaotic self when planning a trip, but right now it sounded disingenuous. "I'll check," I said, the words catching in my throat. I went upstairs, trying not to act suspicious, and found her in our bedroom. She was packing for our trip and was holding up a sun hat as I walked in. "How do I look?" she asked, smiling brightly. "Is this too touristy? Tell me the truth." I resisted the urge to look at her phone again. "No," I said calmly. "It's okay, good for the sun." She sniffed the air. "Maybe," she said. "I'll hold on to it just in case." Then she glanced at me and said, "Are you okay? You seem upset." I shook my head. "No, I'm fine. Just trying to make sure we have everything ready before we leave." She came over and stood beside me. "You're always so thorough," she said, looking up at me. Her hand brushed against my arm, and I had to stop myself from flinching. "Somebody's gotta be," I said, with a bit of dry sarcasm. She laughed again. It wasn't as cute as it used to be. "Don't get too flustered over it," she said, resuming packing her suitcase. "It's vacation. You should try to relax for once, all right?" I observed her for a second. She was getting better at this. "I'll go get that sunscreen," I eventually said, heading back for the door. "Good, and snacks," she added as I exited. I went downstairs, making an effort not to rush until I was out of sight. My phone buzzed in my pocket, and although I knew who it was, I still felt a sense of unease. Out in the fresh air, everything felt different. It was hard to describe, but it was like I was an alien on a foreign planet. I got in my car and slammed the door behind me. Taking the phone out of my pocket, I hesitated. I told myself I was doing it to protect my family. Maybe that was true, but I also just wanted to see it again. I had to see it again. I unlocked the screen. It was from Mark, just like before. There was an additional text from him now as well. If you cancel tomorrow, I'll take it personally. I wanted to throw up. Instead, I scrolled through their conversation again, taking screenshots of everything. I counted them once I was finished. 16 screenshots. That's how long the conversation was. 16 screenshots. And yet, it didn't feel like it was enough. I looked at my reflection in the rearview mirror. It looked like I was about to explode. Maybe I was. I put her phone back in my pocket. I needed to think, to figure out a plan. But most of all, I needed to get rid of that box, which I hadn't really done yet. I parked in the driveway and turned off the headlights, submerging myself in darkness. I stayed in the car for a minute or two, trying to calm down. It didn't help. It was like there wasn't enough air in the world for me to breathe normally. I went inside, and it was just as hard to breathe in there. Emily had left, which was exactly what I had expected. I went upstairs to make sure she hadn't forgotten anything. Her suitcases were still there, just as I had hoped. It was all coming together. I walked into the kitchen. The box was still in the same place I had left it on the counter. The house was quiet, too quiet. I had waited about 10 minutes after Emily had left. She told me she needed to pick up some wine for our trip. I could hear her car leaving the driveway. Our bags were packed and ready in the bedroom upstairs. Emily had said she wanted to leave early the next morning. This was my chance. The box containing the hidden camera was still where I had left it, on the counter in the kitchen. I had signed for it earlier today when it got delivered by mail. I hadn't opened it yet, but now I ripped it open with a knife and took out the small black camera. It looked like an ordinary webcam. I guess that's what it was. It came with an app I could download for free. The camera was wireless. I could watch the feed on my laptop or on my phone. I went into the living room and looked around. It was strange. I had never been able to see how much of Emily's presence was in the room. It was her smell, her taste in furniture and decorations. I had been blind to it before, but now it was like she was everywhere. She was a part of everything. I didn't want to think about it. I had to focus on the task at hand. I looked around for a place to put the camera. There was a large painting of us on the wall above the fireplace. It was from our trip to Italy on our 10th anniversary. I didn't want to think about that either, so I looked away. I found a spot for the camera on a shelf in the corner of the room. It was facing the couch and the area where she usually trained with Mark. I hid it behind some books so it wouldn't be visible. I had to make sure it was working. I took out my phone and opened the app. It showed a live feed from the camera. The quality was good. I adjusted the angle a little bit, and then checked the feed again. I could see the entire living room, including the couch and the space where she was during her training sessions with Mark. I felt a pang of guilt for doing this. It was an invasion of her privacy. But I had to know if she was cheating on me. I couldn't live with the uncertainty any longer. I had to know the truth. I went back to the kitchen and grabbed my laptop. I connected it to the camera and watched the feed on the screen. It worked. I would be able to see everything that happened in the living room. I didn't have to wait long for Emily to return. She came back with a bag of groceries and a bottle of wine. I quickly closed the laptop and put it away. "Hey," she said as she entered the kitchen. "I got some wine and snacks for the trip." "Great," I said, trying to act normal. "Good, because tomorrow, no work emails, no deadlines, no stress." She leaned on the counter, hip out, that megawatt smile of hers aimed right at me. "Just us, drinks on a beach, okay?" She tilted her head to the side, almost as if she were studying my response. "Yeah," I said, "sounds good." Her smile widened, but there was something unsettling about it now, something that felt manipulated and forced. "Great. I think I earned this vacation, don't you?" I didn't answer. That night, she acted as if nothing had happened. She hummed to herself while she brushed her teeth and washed her face. She went to bed with her tablet, reading some article or other on a blog. She talked casually about the people she had met at the store, how happy she was that the laundry was done, how much she was looking forward to a day at the beach. She kissed me goodnight and turned out her light. Who did that? Who acted like everything was normal, walked through all the destruction they had caused, leaving it behind as if it were nothing? I waited until she was asleep and then got out of bed and went to the office. I sat down at my desk and opened my laptop. I brought up the screenshots of my wife's conversation with Mark, reviewing them over and over again with a growing sense of disbelief. She had been cheating on me with Mark. What if there were others? If she had been willing to lie to my face about him, then what else could she be hiding from me? I opened our cloud drive and looked through some of the folders. Receipts, photos from our vacations, old projects. Then I found something. It wasn't obvious, but it was there. I felt a sense of dread as I opened it, fearing what I might find. Emails, several of them. Some of them were flirtatious in nature, others were more explicit. Another man. I opened one of the emails and read it. It was from someone named Jonathan. I can't believe we almost got caught last time. Text me when she's not home this week. I was so focused on my task, I didn't even hear the door open behind me. Couldn't sleep? I nearly jumped out of my chair at the sound of her voice. It was her. I hadn't expected that. After a moment of hesitation, I stood up and walked past her with some excuse. I went back to my room and waited for the morning, trying to come up with a plan. Now, I entered the cafe, leaving the silence of my office behind. The smell of coffee hit me, and I took a deep breath. It was a comforting smell. I saw him sitting by a table, looking very relaxed. The air was cool and sharp as I stepped into the coffee shop. The faint hum of grinding beans filled the space, underscored by the erratic hiss of the espresso machine. Afternoon sunlight poured through the large windows, casting long, distorted rectangles onto the polished wooden floor. People murmured quietly at their tables, heads bent over steaming lattes and glowing screens. Life went on, unbothered and steady, as mine teetered on the edge of something unrecognizable. Mark was already there, seated at a booth near the back, his posture loose, casual, too casual. One arm draped over the back of the seat, legs spread in a way that occupied more space than necessary. His sandy blonde hair gleamed, sunlit through the window, and that damn dimpled smile flashed too easily as he spoke into his phone. I slipped my hands into the pockets of my jacket, the bulge of my own phone, a silent, damning witness, pressing against my palm. My jaw tightened as I crossed the floor, weaving between tables with deliberate steps. He hadn't seen me yet. "Yeah, maybe Thursday works better," Mark was saying, his voice carrying that practiced warmth that seemed just a hair too loud. He chuckled, low and self-assured. "You too. Talk soon." He ended the call and set his phone on the table, finally glancing in my direction. His eyes widened slightly with recognition, but if there was unease, he hid it well. That smile appeared again, easy and sly, spreading just enough to reveal bright white teeth. "Daniel, right?" he said, leaning forward slightly in greeting as I sat across from him. His voice had the kind of confidence that grated, as though we were friends or co-conspirators in some unspoken game. I nodded once. "Thanks for meeting me." "No problem at all," he said, studying me briefly. Perhaps he noticed my stiff demeanor, the way I chose the edge of the booth, rather than settling into the seat. "I thought you might want to get serious about training, huh? Emily's always raving about how you're overdue for it." He laughed as though we were sharing some private joke. I didn't respond, letting his words settle awkwardly in the empty space between us. My eyes found his, refusing to blink first. His grin faltered, barely, before he glanced toward the menu board hanging above the counter. "You want a coffee or something?" he asked, gesturing vaguely toward the barista behind the counter. "You look like you could use one." "No," I said, my voice coming out too calm. "I have everything I need." Something flickered across his face, mild confusion, but his easy demeanor didn't slip entirely. He leaned back, draping his arm over the booth again. "All right," he said lightly. "So, what's up?" For a moment, I didn't answer. I reached into the inside pocket of my jacket, felt the reassuring weight of folded papers there, and removed them with deliberate precision. I unfolded the first sheet, smoothing it flat against the table between us. Mark leaned forward slightly, his head tilting as his bright, casual gaze scanned the page. The words were his. The photo of him shirtless, grinning smugly, filled the bottom corner of the printout. Even from across the table, I saw the way his face changed, like watching light dim beneath heavy storm clouds. A slow, dawning recognition crept into his sandy features just before his shoulders stiffened. He glanced toward me, the remnants of his cocky charm teetering in place like a shaky ladder. "What is this?" he asked, though the slight waver in his voice suggested he already knew. I didn't answer right away. I placed another sheet in front of him, a screenshot of an even bolder message, one punctuated with an emoji that made my stomach churn when I first read it. "Jesus," he muttered under his breath, sitting up straighter now. "Where the hell did you get this?" "That doesn't matter." My voice was low, steady. What matters is that I have it. All of it. I slid one final sheet onto the growing pile. This one was worse, the kind of message that couldn't be twisted into anything other than exactly what it was. His face blanched as he read it, color draining so fast it felt almost theatrical. Gone was the smooth-talking fitness trainer, the one who treated every interaction like another session to win clients and admiration. What I saw now, across the table, was nothing but a man caught square in the crosshairs. "Look, man," he started, his voice low and rushed now. "This must be—" "Don't," I interrupted, sharper this time. My knuckles pressed into the edge of the table as I leaned forward just slightly, my piercing blue eyes locking onto his. "Don't insult me by pretending you don't know exactly what this is." He sat back, swallowing hard, and for a fleeting moment I saw his mask crack. He wasn't used to this, being cornered. "It's not— Look, Daniel, I don't know what Emily told you, but—" "Stop," I said firmly, cutting through his excuses like a blade through paper. I let the silence hang heavy between us for a moment, watching as his bravado eroded further under the weight of it. Then, slowly, I pulled my phone from my pocket and placed it face up on the table, the screen just faintly reflecting the stark overhead lighting. "What's on these pages," I said, gesturing to the pile, "is just the start. There are videos, pictures, timestamps. There's a timeline, Mark, more than enough for Emily's friends to see. Her family. Your clients." His breathing quickened, his hands flattening against his thighs as though to keep them from shaking. Man, I didn't mean for—" His voice broke slightly, and he tried again. "I didn't think it would—" "It doesn't matter what you thought," I spat, harsher now, the first needle of anger threading through my control. "What matters is what you did. What you're doing." His gaze darted briefly to the other patrons in the cafe, as though willing them to intervene or at least bear witness to his public unraveling. When none of them spared us a second glance, his eyes returned to me, wide and desperate now. "Look, I'm sorry, all right? I'm sorry I'm not here for your apologies." My voice was low again, almost eerily calm. I leaned back slowly, folding my arms across my chest as I stared him down. "I don't care why you did it or what you were thinking. Your mistakes are yours to deal with. What I care about, what I need you to understand, is how this ends." Mark blinked at me, his Adam's apple bobbing as he swallowed. "Ends?" he repeated weakly. I nodded. "One of two ways," I said coolly. "You pack up, you leave the city. No forwarding address, no farewell party, no texts or calls or Instagram DMs. You disappear, Mark, and I don't ever see you near my wife or my house or even so much as the same road we drive on." "And if I don't?" he asked, though the trembling edge to his voice betrayed his attempt at defiance. "Option 2, I said calmly, "is much messier. I send copies of everything to every single one of your clients, and just for good measure, I put in a call to your gym's management about inappropriate conduct during private training sessions. How many other lines have you blurred, Mark? How many other stool pushers and flirtatious comments have turned into this?" His face twisted, his hands gripping his knees tightly enough that his knuckles turned white. For a long moment, we stared at each other, the once casual hum of the cafe now a jarring background symphony to the charged silence between us. I can't," he started weakly, but I tilted my head slightly, raising an eyebrow. The weight of my unyielding stare was enough to force the rest of the air from his lungs as he deflated. "I'll do it," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'll leave." "When?" "A week," he said quickly, wringing his hands together. "Maybe less. I just need time to, I don't know, sell some stuff or—" "3 days," I snapped, watching his expression collapse further. "You have 3 days." Mark nodded slowly, his shoulders slumping in silent defeat. For the first time since I'd sat down, I allowed myself the faintest release of breath. Only a fraction. He grabbed his phone hastily, muttering a soft, barely coherent apology as he started to rise, but I stopped him with one last remark. "And Mark?" My voice was steel as he froze halfway to standing. "If I ever catch wind of you so much as looking Emily's way again—" I paused, letting my words sink like stones. "What I have on you now will seem merciful." His face turned an even paler shade of white before he nodded jerkily, his eyes cast downward. Then he turned and bolted for the exit without a glance back. The door chimed softly as it closed behind him. I sat there alone for a moment longer, leaning back in the stiff wooden booth, as a strange calm settled over me. It wasn't satisfaction, not even close to it, but as I stared through the glass at Mark's figure retreating down the street, there was a faint rush of something unfamiliar. Control. I left the untouched pile of printouts on the table and walked out. The city lights blurred into streaks as the hours bled into the deep hush of night. By the time I reached home, the once overcast sky had cleared, laying bare a waning crescent moon that cast its cold light through the windows. Inside, the world felt smaller, quieter, like the pause after a storm. I slipped into the kitchen, setting my keys on the counter with a faint metallic clink, and the low hum of the ceiling fan greeted me. Settling into the chair at the table, I opened the laptop, its soft blue glow cutting through the darkness. My fingers hovered over the keys as the night closed in, the silence heavy with purpose. There was work to do. The kitchen was dark, except for the pale blue light of the laptop screen. I sat back in my chair and cracked my knuckles. The file was ready. It was just like the last time. All the evidence was there, all the proof. Jonathan couldn't deny it, and neither could his wife. I looked at the screen for a few more seconds. The ceiling fan's monotonous sound made the silence feel less suffocating. This house was like a prison. It was as if Emily's lies had covered the walls, the floor, the ceiling. I felt trapped by it all, but soon I would be free. Tonight wasn't about Emily, though, not directly. Tonight was about Jonathan. He was going to be punished, just like Mark had been. I picked up my phone from the table and dialed Linda's number. I had known her for a long time, but I had never been this nervous to call her before. She was a kind, caring person, and I hated to be the one to hurt her, but she deserved to know the truth. The phone rang a few times before she answered. "Daniel? Hi, what's up?" "Hey, Linda," I said. "Sorry for calling so late." "No worries at all," she replied. "I was just about to finish up some knitting. What can I do for you?" I took a deep breath. "I need to talk to you about something important. It's about Jonathan." There was a brief pause on the other end of the line. "Okay. What is it?" she asked, her voice tinged with concern. "I think it's better if I tell you in person," I said. "Do you mind if I come over?" Another pause. "Sure, of course," she said. "I'll put on some tea. Is everything okay?" I hesitated for a moment, trying to decide how much to say over the phone. "Not really," I finally said. "I'll explain when I get there. I'll be over in 5 minutes." "All right," Linda said, sounding a little worried now. "See you soon." I hung up the phone and stood up. My heart was pounding in my chest. I grabbed the manila folder from the table and tucked it under my arm. I turned off the laptop and the kitchen went dark. I caught a glimpse of my own reflection in the window, and for a moment I didn't recognize the face staring back at me, but I couldn't let that stop me. I had to see this through. I left the house and stepped out into the chilly night air. The neighborhood was quiet, the only sound the distant hum of a nearby air conditioning unit. I tried to calm myself down as I walked across the street to Linda and Jonathan's house. Linda was already waiting for me at the door. She opened it as soon as I walked up the steps. She was wearing a cozy cardigan, her auburn hair tied back in a thick braid. "Come in," she said, giving me a warm smile. But there was a hint of curiosity and concern in her eyes. I stepped inside, feeling a little guilty about the bombshell I was about to drop on her. She was such a sweet person, and I hated to be the bearer of bad news, but it had to be done. "Thanks," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "The tea is in the kitchen," Linda said, leading the way. I followed her to the kitchen, my heart still pounding in my chest. I took a seat at the kitchen table, setting the folder in front of me. Linda poured us both a cup of tea, and then sat down across from me. "So, what's this all about?" she asked, looking at me expectantly. I hesitated for a moment, unsure of how to begin. "I found something," I said slowly. "Something I think you need to see." Linda's expression shifted, a flicker of worry crossing her face. "What is it?" she asked. I opened the folder, revealing the first photo. It was a picture of Jonathan and Emily, sitting together in a cafe. They were sitting close, Jonathan's hand resting on Emily's leg. Linda's eyes widened. She opened her mouth to say something, but no words came out. "I'm sorry," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I know this is hard to see, but I thought you deserved to know." Linda reached for the photo, her hand trembling. She studied it for a moment, her eyes darting back and forth as if looking for some kind of explanation. "This can't be real," she said, her voice shaky, but there was doubt in her eyes, a seed of doubt that was quickly growing into something more. I flipped to the next page. It was a series of text messages between Jonathan and Emily. At first, they seemed innocent enough, but as the conversation continued, it became clear that there was something more going on between them. Linda's hand flew to her mouth as she read the messages. Tears welled up in her eyes, and she let out a small, choked sob. "How could he do this to me?" she whispered, more to herself than to me. "I'm sorry," I said again, feeling a pang of guilt. Linda looked up at me, her eyes filled with pain and confusion. "Where did you get this?" "It doesn't matter," I said. "What matters is that it's real." I didn't want to believe it either. Linda's breath hitched, and she looked back down at the photos. Her tears were falling freely now, dripping onto the table. She flipped through the rest of the pages, each one a new piece of evidence of Jonathan's betrayal. "This isn't happening," she murmured, her voice barely audible. I watched in silence as she processed the information. I felt a mix of emotions: guilt, sympathy, but also a sense of vindication. Jonathan had brought this upon himself, just like Mark had. Linda finally set the photos down, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. She looked at me, her expression a mixture of anger and sadness. "Thank you for telling me," she said, her voice strained. "I don't know what I'm going to do, but thank you." I nodded, unsure of what to say. Linda stood up, her chair scraping against the floor. She walked over to the sink, staring out the window with a distant look in her eyes. I got up from the table, feeling like I had overstayed my welcome. "I should go," I said. "If you need anything, just let me know." Linda nodded, not turning around. I left the house, feeling a little numb. I had done what needed to be done, but it didn't feel as satisfying as I had hoped. I just felt empty. As I walked back to my own house, I couldn't help but think about what Emily would say if she knew what I had done. Would she be angry, or would she be relieved that the truth was finally out? One thing was for sure: this was only the beginning. Emily was next. 3 days later, everything was quiet. I had seen Jonathan leave for work in the morning, but he wasn't sitting on the front steps when I got home. Linda's car was gone too. I didn't know where they had gone, but it didn't matter. I knew that this was only the beginning of the end for Jonathan. And I was sitting in Mr. Carter's office. It was a cold, impersonal space, designed to project authority and professionalism. Everything was gray or black, and the furniture was sparse and minimalistic. There was no artwork on the walls, no personal touches anywhere, as if the room itself wasn't meant to be comfortable. I felt uncomfortable, to say the least. I still hadn't calmed down from my confrontation with Mark and Linda. The weeks of stress and anxiety were starting to take their toll on me, and I felt a constant pressure in my chest, a tightness that wouldn't go away. But at least I was finally here. This was the last step in my plan for revenge. Mr. Carter was browsing through the folder I had given him, the one containing all the evidence of Emily's infidelity. I had carefully documented everything, from text messages and emails to photographs and video recordings. I had even gone so far as to install a secret camera in our bedroom, capturing Emily's betrayal in the most intimate and incriminating way possible. I felt a pang of guilt at the thought, but I pushed it aside. I had to do this. I had to protect myself and my kids. Mr. Carter looked up from the folder, his expression unreadable. He was a tall, thin man with a sharp nose and piercing blue eyes. His hair was gray and neatly combed, and he wore a dark suit and tie. He had a reputation for being ruthless and efficient, and I had no doubt that he would do whatever it took to win my case. "This is quite a lot of evidence," he said, his voice calm and professional. "Are you sure there's no other explanation for any of this?" I shook my head. "No, there's no doubt in my mind. My wife is having an affair, and I have the proof right here." Mr. Carter nodded, looking satisfied. "Very well. This will certainly help your case, but we need to be careful. We can't let her know we're on to her until we have everything in place." "I understand," I said, feeling a sense of relief. "What do we do now?" "We'll start by filing for divorce," Mr. Carter said. "But we'll do it in a way that catches her off guard. We want to make sure she doesn't have time to prepare a counterattack." I nodded, feeling a sense of satisfaction. This was exactly what I wanted. I wanted to take Emily by surprise, to make her pay for what she had done to me. "And what about custody of the children?" I asked, my voice tinged with concern. "I want to make sure they're safe, and that they don't have to go through this." "We'll fight for full custody," Mr. Carter said, his tone resolute. "Given the evidence we have, I believe we have a strong case, but it's not going to be easy. We'll need to be strategic and careful." I felt a sense of hope at his words. Maybe there was a way out of this nightmare, a way to protect my children and rebuild my life. "Thank you," I said, my voice filled with gratitude. "I don't know what I would do without your help." Mr. Carter gave me a small smile, a rare expression of warmth. "Don't worry, we'll get through this, and we'll make sure you come out on top." I left his office feeling a mix of emotions, relief, anger, and a sense of determination. I had a plan now, a way to take control of my life and protect my children, but I knew it wouldn't be easy. I had a long and difficult road ahead of me, and I would need all the help I could get. As I walked back to my car, I couldn't help but feel a sense of sadness. I had loved Emily once, with all my heart, but now all I felt was betrayal and anger. I didn't know if I could ever forgive her, or if I even wanted to. But one thing was certain: I would do whatever it took to protect my children, even if it meant destroying the woman I had once loved. And as I drove home, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning of a long and painful journey. But I was ready for it. I had to be, for the sake of my children. I got home later that evening. The hum of the ceiling fan filled the quiet of the kitchen, a low, rhythmic sound that tethered me to some semblance of calm. Emily's voice had long since disappeared. She'd gone upstairs hours ago, her predictable nightly routine marking the house like clockwork. It was quiet now, dark, except for the faint amber glow of the stove's clock display, casting crooked, soft shadows onto the counter. In that silence, I tapped my phone screen, scrolling without focus. My inbox was empty apart from Carter's updates. His last email detailed upcoming deadlines and instructions for the subpoena. He had attached timelines, filings, explanations laid bare in legalese. It should have been comforting, that sense of progress, of movement. Instead, it felt mechanical, cold, as though the steps for disassembling a marriage were no different than filing a tax return or canceling a subscription. I set the phone down carefully, deliberately, before leaning back in the chair. My gaze lingered on the empty fruit bowl at the center of the table, a small thing, insignificant in any other moment, but profoundly irritating now. Emily had told me earlier in the week she'd bought apples. She hadn't, of course. A spectrum of small lies, ones I hadn't even cared to register before, all came into sharp focus now, as if my resentment had trained a magnifying glass onto her every movement. But this wasn't about apples or sunscreen or her radiantly hollow smile when she thought no one questioned her. It was about control. Piece by piece, crack by crack, her world needed to collapse as methodically as she'd dismantled mine. The courts would eventually deal their blow, swift and final, but I wasn't willing to let her waltz around unscathed until then. No, this would take strategy, care, precision. I reached for my phone again and opened my contact list. Scrolling slowly, I landed on a familiar name, Olivia. My thumb hovered over it briefly before I selected it, composing a brief text. "Hey, Olivia. It's been a while. Any chance we can catch up this week? I have something I thought you might want to know. Something vague enough to pique her curiosity. Something she wouldn't resist." The cafe was busy, but not overwhelming. Mid-morning sunlight streamed through the windows, casting golden shafts of warmth across the tiled floor and tabletops where patrons nursed lattes and absent-minded conversation. The low hum of chatter blended with the clink of ceramic mugs and the grind of coffee beans. Normal, steady, alive. Olivia sat across from me, one perfectly manicured finger tapping idly against the rim of her cup. Her blonde hair was pulled into a neat braid, and she leaned forward slightly, her emerald eyes fixed on me with curiosity that veered toward suspicion. That was her default, friendly, but always cautious. She was sharp like that, pragmatic in the kind of way that made people spill secrets without even realizing they'd done it. Because of that, I'd chosen her carefully. "So," she said finally, breaking the silence between us. "This must be big if you're asking to meet. What's going on?" It wasn't the opening I'd anticipated, but it would do. I let a small pause stretch before I spoke, careful to arrange my words like a house of cards, balanced but fragile, enough to invite curiosity while holding back the full truth. "Well, I'm not really sure how to start," I said, exhaling like the confession itself weighed heavily. "But it's about Emily." Olivia tilted her head, her polite expression shifting ever so slightly, amusement weaving into her features. "Emily? Did she decide to start another neighborhood yoga group or something? Her nonchalance was expected. Emily's reputation, carefully curated over bridal showers and wine nights, wasn't something most people questioned outright. They saw only the glittering veneer, the easy charm, the woman who made socializing look effortless. I shook my head, the faintest wisp of an indulgent smile ghosting my lips. Not exactly. Olivia's eyebrows lifted, her curiosity finally snagged. She leaned in closer, her expression sharpening. What aren't you saying? I shouldn't. I trailed off, glancing away as though I were debating the wisdom of continuing. The act, not too dramatic, just hesitant enough, would carry weight. I glanced back at her deliberately, lowering my voice. Let's just say I've come across some things. Things that, if I'm honest, have blindsided me. You've known us for years, Olivia. You know the kind of trust, the commitment it takes to make a marriage work. She frowned slightly, her hands wrapping protectively around her cup, suddenly more attentive. What kind of things? I hesitated again, letting the tension hang between us like the stretch of a violin string. I don't want to go into detail. It's still complicated, but... I inhaled deeply, my gaze dropping to my own untouched coffee. Well, I've been putting together pieces, little signs, and I think I know. There are truths about Emily that would change the way people see her. Olivia's lips parted slightly, but no words emerged. I could see her mind working, her previous amusement now replaced with sharper scrutiny. She didn't jump to conclusions outwardly, but her silence held them in potential, testing them wordlessly. You're serious about this, she said eventually, her voice quieter now, sharper. Not exactly accusing, but definitely clarifying. I nodded, slow and deliberate. You're one of the few people I thought I could trust with this, and frankly, I figured if anyone had noticed anything off, it might be you. That was my hook. Olivia prided herself on being perceptive, and if there were anything that could turn suspicion into investigation, it was the implication that the answers had been there all along, if only she had looked. She leaned back in her chair, her brows knitting together as she processed my words. I mean, honestly, I don't know. Emily's always struck me as, well, she waved her hand vaguely, searching for the word. Perfect, or at least really good at making it seem that way. It wasn't condemnation, not yet, but it was enough. I shrugged lightly, as if reluctant to fully affirm her thought. Exactly, I said, barely louder than a whisper. But sometimes the image people go out of their way to protect... My voice trailed off. She finished the sentence for me in her head. Olivia didn't outright press for details, but the seed was planted. I could see it in the way her index finger tapped her mug again, her emerald eyes distant now, as though new narratives swirled behind them. No outright accusations, no clearly defined suspicions, just an anxious itch to pull together possibilities. To quietly wonder if Emily's constant beaming perfection was something worth questioning after all. By the time we parted ways, there was no doubt. She didn't need me to say more. Small insinuations, the faint cracks implied between words, would do the rest of the work for me. A week later, as I came back from the grocery store, I saw her through the front window, Emily holding her phone close to her ear, pacing the kitchen in agitated, uneven steps. She wasn't wearing her practiced expressions, not the soft warmth she put on for neighbors or the thin veneer of pleasant boredom she wore during errands. No, this face was pinched and anxious, her body language taut. You were supposed to tell me about brunch, she hissed into the phone, her voice spiking before falling abruptly quieter. Don't tell me it slipped your mind, Olivia. You've never forgotten before. The mention of Olivia's name was enough for me to pause in the driveway, clutching the grocery bags in my hands a second longer than was necessary. I leaned forward slightly, eyes narrowing. It was impossible to hear who was on the other end or what they were saying, but Emily's reaction was plain. Her jaw tightened, her teeth clicking faintly as she muttered another response, her pacing growing more erratic. No, it's fine. No. She waved her free hand in frustration as though swatting away visible pests. Yeah, no, I get it. Next time, just whatever. Just let me know. She hung up abruptly, her phone slamming onto the counter with a dull thud. The movement sent an empty glass wobbling before it toppled to the floor and shattered into pieces. She stared at the shards with a wide-eyed frustration before her body visibly sank, defeated. I quietly stepped inside, setting the groceries down in their assigned place. Emily turned sharply at the sound of the door, her green eyes momentarily wild before forcing something neutral, a tight smile that didn't meet her eyes. "Hey," she said. Her voice was too casual to be convincing. "How was the store?" I shrugged. "Easy enough. You okay?" Yeah, she said quickly, brushing past me toward the sink, her movements robotic. "I just dropped a glass. Stupid, really." "Ah," I nodded, filling the silence with nothing. As I picked up the bags, she turned her back to me, muttering faintly as she grabbed the broom. "It's been one of those mornings." I could see the strain she fought to keep hidden, the tension unraveling faster now. Weeks ago, she would have vented freely about Olivia or whoever else had frustrated her. Now, there were cracks she didn't quite know how to patch. I smiled faintly where she couldn't see. The unraveling had only just begun. Next step, Jonathan. The weight of the bag shifted in my grip as I stepped out into the brisk air, the door clicking shut behind me. The morning's haze hung low, softening the edges of the street as I loaded everything into the car with slow, deliberate movements. The drive was quiet, just the low hum of tires on asphalt and the occasional rhythm of a passing truck. Time stretched, marked only by the fading glow of amber streetlights as I left the neighborhood behind. By the time I parked and stepped into the courthouse, the world felt reduced to muted tones, the muffled echo of footsteps against polished floors wrapping around me like static. My reflection flickered briefly on the glass doors as I pushed them open, the sterile chill inside pressing in as I turned down the long hallway. Moments later, I was crossing into the courtroom, Carter already seated, his calm efficiency folding seamlessly into the unnatural stillness of the space. The courtroom was a drab, colorless place designed to be devoid of personality. The walls were painted an off-white color and the wood benches were a muted brown. A clock ticked quietly in the background, counting down the seconds until the judge would enter. A few other people were seated on the benches behind us, talking in low tones. None of them were here for us, except for Carter, who was sitting on my left. He had been busy writing down notes in his journal, preparing for the court appearance. He looked confident, not worried in the least. Emily was sitting on the other side of the aisle, looking nervous. She was talking to her lawyer in a low voice. I could tell she was anxious because she was twisting her bracelet around her wrist, a habit she'd always had when she was nervous. She was dressed nicely, of course, and had done her hair in a way that made her look elegant, but I could see the tension in her face, the way her lips were pressed together, and her eyes darted around the room. She was trying to put on a brave face, but I could see the cracks in her armor. I looked at her, studying her face, trying to see if I could find any trace of the woman I had married. I didn't see it. I didn't know this woman anymore, I realized. Maybe I never really had. "Focus," Carter said, looking at me out of the corner of his eye. His voice was calm and even, but there was an edge to it, a hint of frustration. I nodded, tearing my gaze away from Emily. I had to focus on what mattered now, the evidence, the truth. I had to prove to the judge that I was the better parent, that I deserved custody of our children. I couldn't let my emotions get in the way. I looked down at the folder of evidence on the table in front of me. It was my trump card, the proof I needed to win this case. I placed my hand on top of it, feeling the coolness of the paper beneath my fingertips. It felt reassuring, like a lifeline. I took a deep breath, trying to calm the racing of my heart. The judge entered the courtroom, and everyone stood up. I felt a sense of anticipation in the air, a tension that had been building for weeks. It was time to face the truth. "All rise," the bailiff said, and we all stood up as the judge took her seat behind the bench. "You may be seated," she said, and we all sat back down. The judge looked at us, her expression unreadable. I couldn't tell what she was thinking, what she might decide. I felt a knot of anxiety in my stomach, a fear that I might lose everything. The proceedings began, and I tried to pay attention, but it was difficult. My mind kept wandering, thinking about the past, about the future. I was afraid of what might happen, of what I might lose. But I had to stay focused, I reminded myself. I had to prove that I was the better parent, the one who deserved custody of our children. The judge called on Carter to present our case, and he stood up, looking confident and composed. I could tell he had done this many times before, that he knew exactly what to say. "Your Honor," he began, "this is a case about betrayal, deceit, and the destruction of a family. My client, Mr. Hauser, has been the primary breadwinner and caregiver for his children for many years, and he has done everything in his power to provide a stable and loving home for them. But his wife, Mrs. Hauser, has repeatedly undermined his efforts with her infidelity and her lies. Today, we will present evidence that proves beyond a shadow of a doubt that she has been having an affair with another man, and that this affair has put her children's well-being at risk. He paused, letting his words sink in. My client is seeking full custody of his children, as well as a fair division of their assets. He believes that this is in the best interest of his children, and we will present evidence that supports this claim. He sat back down, his expression calm and confident. Emily's lawyer stood up, looking a bit nervous. He was a tall, thin man with glasses and a receding hairline. He cleared his throat before speaking. "Your Honor," he said, "my client, Mrs. Hauser, acknowledges that she has made some mistakes in her marriage. However, she believes that these mistakes do not warrant the drastic measures that Mr. Hauser is seeking. She is a loving and devoted mother, and she wants to continue to be a part of her children's lives. We will present evidence that shows she is a fit parent and that she deserves to have joint custody of their children." He sat back down, looking a bit more confident now. The judge nodded, and then she turned to Carter. "Mr. Carter, you may present your evidence," she said. Carter stood up again and began presenting the evidence we had gathered. He started with the photographs of Emily and Mark together, showing them in various locations around the city. Then he showed the emails and text messages that had been exchanged between the two of them. It was damning evidence, and I could see Emily's face growing paler and paler as each piece was revealed. I tried not to look at her, to focus on the evidence instead. But it was hard. I could feel her presence, her shame and guilt, and it made me feel sick to my stomach. But I had to stay strong, I reminded myself. I had to prove that I was the better parent. Finally, Carter finished presenting the evidence, and he sat back down. "Your Honor," he said, "I believe this evidence speaks for itself. Mrs. Hauser's actions have put her children's well-being at risk, and my client is seeking full custody in order to provide them with a safe and stable home." The judge nodded, and then she turned to Emily's lawyer. "Do you have any evidence to present?" she asked. Emily's lawyer stood up again, looking a bit flustered. He shook his head. "No, Your Honor," he said. "We do not have any evidence to present at this time." The judge nodded again, and then she looked at me. "Mr. Hauser," she said, "do you have anything you would like to say?" I felt my heart skip a beat. This was my chance, my opportunity to speak directly to the judge, to plead my case. I stood up, feeling a bit nervous but also determined. "Your Honor," I said, "I love my children more than anything in the world. I have always tried to be the best father I can be, to provide them with a safe and loving home. I believe that I am the best parent for them, and I am asking for full custody in order to protect them from the harm that my wife's actions have caused. I want to give them the stability and security that they deserve." I paused, trying to find the right words. I know that my wife has made mistakes, but I also know that she loves our children. I don't want to take them away from her completely, but I do believe that I am the better parent, and I want to provide them with the best life possible. I hope that you will consider my request, and I thank you for your time. I sat back down, feeling a bit relieved that I had said my piece. The judge nodded, and then she turned to Emily. "Mrs. Hauser," she said, "do you have anything you would like to say?" Emily stood up, looking nervous and a bit shaky. "Your Honor," she said, "I love my children more than anything in the world. I know that I have made mistakes, but I am willing to do whatever it takes to make things right. I want to be a part of my children's lives, and I am asking for joint custody in order to be able to continue to be a part of their lives. I believe that I am a fit parent, and I hope that you will consider my request. Thank you for your time." She sat back down, looking a bit relieved that she had said her piece. The judge nodded, and then she looked at both of us. "I have heard both of your arguments, and I have reviewed the evidence," she said. "I will now make my decision." My heart was pounding in my chest as I waited for her to speak. I felt a sense of dread, a fear that I might lose everything. "Mr. Hauser," the judge said, "I believe that you have presented a compelling case. I believe that you are the better parent, and I am granting you full custody of your children. Mrs. Hauser, you will have visitation rights, but they will be supervised for the time being. As for the division of assets, I am awarding Mr. Hauser the house and a larger portion of the financial assets. I believe this is a fair and just decision, given the circumstances." I felt a wave of relief wash over me as I heard her words. I had won. I had fought for my children, and I had won. Emily looked devastated, and I felt a pang of sympathy for her. I knew that she loved our children, and I knew that she would be a part of their lives, even if it was in a limited capacity. But I also knew that this was the best decision for our children, for their safety and well-being. The judge banged her gavel, and the courtroom was dismissed. As I left the courtroom, I felt a sense of freedom, of liberation. I had fought for my children, and I had won. I was free to move on with my life, to create a new...
All right, everyone's presentations are done, Nick, the manager, said as he tried to move the discussion forward. Excuse me, I haven't. I recently found out something. Nick interrupted me and began to speak. There's apparently someone in this department who didn't graduate high school and is just a part-timer. Meetings should be for employees only. Absolutely right. His lackey, Mike, of course, agreed with Nick. I'm leaving. After leaving the meeting room, I started to shut down my computer. I noticed that an email had arrived, not in my personal inbox, but in the company's shared email. Thinking, there's no point in speaking up, no one will listen, I went home quietly. The next day, I heard a commotion from Nick's desk. He was staring at his computer screen, his face pale. Nick? Is something wrong? Mike looked at the screen with him. And he turned even paler than Nick. Why is he so angry? Knowing the reason for Mike's distress, I thought to myself, serves them right. My name is Adam. My mother passed away when I was in the 9th grade, and I was raised by my father. Well, you could hardly call it being raised. After my mother passed, my father changed. He drowned his sorrows in alcohol, and though he still went to work, he squandered our living expenses on horse racing. Because of that, I had to start working part-time as soon as I entered high school. Every month, I went to the convenience store with bills in hand that couldn't be auto-deducted from my father's account. Even though I endured it because I didn't want to be alone, I reached my limit in my second year of high school and dropped out. I found a live-in job at a distant inn. Thank you for everything. The day I left home, my father, still staring at the TV, spoke. Take care. That was our last conversation. Back then, 18 wasn't the age of majority, so I needed my father's permission to work, and I couldn't hide my place of employment. Yet, my father never visited me even once. I kept working just to survive, and before I knew it, I was 42. Years of hard work paid off, and I was transferred to the headquarters. I was thrilled to be recognized by the company, as I thought I'd be working in the field until retirement due to my lack of formal education. Listen up. Our work can change the future of our employees. Don't drag us down. On my first day after the transfer, Nick, dressed in an expensive suit, spoke sternly. There was a reason for this. Our inn was located in a prominent tourist destination, known so well that everyone in the state could sing its commercial jingle. At its peak, we had 5 locations within the state. But that was long ago. Due to financial difficulties and aging facilities, only the place where I had worked for many years and the original establishment remained. I was prepared to lose my job anytime, but now there was a glimmer of hope. With the rise of social media, the tourist area where the inn was located started gaining attention again. Depending on how hard the sales department, where I was transferred, worked, we could either thrive or be forced to give up this prime location to the new hotel chains continuously popping up. For Nick, who had switched careers from another industry to strengthen our sales, this was a battle he couldn't afford to lose. I understood why he had to be strict. I will do my best. Nick sneered at my enthusiastic declaration. Did you not hear what I said? I'm sorry. I thought I was listening carefully. Out of habit from years of customer service, I apologized reflexively, though I had no idea what had offended him. Someone was watching me with a smirk. In this department, there are those who are expected to excel and those who have been shoved here because they have nowhere else to go. You are the latter. It was Mike, the section chief. He's 7 years younger, at 35. But he was called to headquarters much earlier than I was and had been moving around within the headquarters ever since. I'm not jealous, but I can't accept that he's my boss. Graduating from a prestigious university, he has an unusually high pride and caused many problems as a newbie, making things very difficult for me when I was the front desk leader. When I found out Mike was transferred to the sales department a month before me, I was disheartened. Mike is right. With just a middle school diploma, there's not much you can do. Don't even think about achieving results. As if I didn't exist, Nick remarked, I'm thirsty. Mike eagerly ran to the coffee maker. It seems Mike is Nick's lackey. I regretted being happy about my transfer to headquarters, wishing I had stayed on site forever. Send a direct mail to every company on this list by the end of the day. Nick only assigned me tasks that even a new graduate could handle. What? There are over 1,000 companies. You want me to send to all of them by today? Yes, if you and your fellow misfits split the work, even those with nowhere else to go should finish by today. I glanced at the employees typing away expressionlessly. They were worn out from customer service, only thinking about leaving on time, or were women reassigned after having children. With zero motivation for work. Even Sam, a new graduate from the same university as Mike, who was supposed to be among the expected achievers, had no enthusiasm for the job. Having joined the company wanting to do customer service. I don't care what they say, I plan to quit anytime, he said. Only Nick and Mike were highly motivated, making all the decisions between the two of them. I originally only wanted to work at the inn to survive and had no particular attachment to this job. I swallowed my words, thinking I had no right to reprimand them. About a month after the transfer, Nick told us with a frustrated look. To commemorate the 50th anniversary, we've decided to create a plan exclusive for one group per day. Originally, Mike and I were supposed to come up with it, but our president, Mr. Thompson, insists on hearing everyone's opinions. So, you all get a chance. As Nick explained, Mike began handing out prints. Make sure not to embarrass Nick. If your ideas are half-baked, you'll have to redo them. It seemed that they had printed his handwritten notes by Mr. Thompson, which included several questions and a section for free responses. It made sense why Nick had to seek our input, given that all responses had to be submitted to Mr. Thompson. We were given a week to think about it, and a meeting was scheduled to compile our ideas. My plan is to let guests enjoy both the old and modern America. Nick began the presentations. Guests would watch a master confectioner at a nearby traditional sweet shop make sweets in front of them. The welcome drink would be premium tea in a bottle. Nick's plan was certainly attractive. After his presentation, Nick called on us to present in the order we were seated. Just as I stood up for my turn. All right, everyone's presentations are done. Excuse me, I haven't. I recently found out something. Nick interrupted me. There's someone in this department who didn't graduate high school and is just a part-timer. He was likely talking about me. I joined the company as a part-timer and was made a full-time employee when I turned 20. That was 20 years ago, so Nick and Mike probably had no chance to know until recently. Meetings should be for employees only. Absolutely right. After that, Nick kept creating opportunities to solicit everyone's opinions, purposefully excluding me from speaking. The meeting unexpectedly heated up and went past the scheduled end time. A few people asked to leave, and the discussion continued with the remaining few. Still here? Normally, you'd leave in that situation. Though I had no attachment to the job initially, hearing kind words from customers made me want to make them happier. For someone like me, with nowhere to go, the inn was my home and customer service was my life. I felt pathetic about my current self. I'm leaving. I left the conference room and started shutting down my computer. I noticed an email had arrived, not in my personal inbox, but in the company's shared email. Thinking no one would listen to what I had to say anyway, I quietly went home. The next day, while preparing the DM as instructed, I heard a commotion from Nick's desk. In his haste to stand up, he hit his knee on the desk. He stared at his computer screen, his face pale. Nick! What's wrong? Mike, thinking he should be the first to rush over, approached Nick while still wearing his coat. He peered at the screen with Nick. And he turned even paler than Nick. Why is he so angry? Who is responsible for this company? Nick, more irritated than ever, asked, and Mike answered without checking. Probably Sam. Sam wasn't there because he was attending a morning training session for new hires. Nick gave up on getting angry and returned his gaze to the screen. They were looking at an email that arrived right after the end of the working day yesterday. Apparently, no one, including me, had checked it before leaving. The email was from a large company that used us for their annual employee trips. The president and executives of that company also frequently used our services personally. President of the company, Mr. Mason himself had declared that neither he nor his company would ever use our services again. Well, some companies cancel their employee trips or stop using our services due to financial struggles. Let's just move on. Mike kept wiping the sweat from his forehead with a handkerchief. Knowing why Mike was so agitated, I quietly watched their interaction. Do you know how much revenue we get from that company? We can find other guests to fill the rooms, but we'll lose the banquet costs, gift shop revenue, rental car fees, and more. Moreover, the gifts were supposed to be prepared by the traditional confectionery shop involved in Nick's proposed plan. If it's known that we incurred such a huge loss at this critical time, Nick's position in the company would be jeopardized. Nick took a deep breath, seemingly trying to calm himself. All right, Mike. Go to New York right now and apologize to Mr. Mason. What? You're coming with me, right? I have urgent work to do. I trust you, which is why I'm entrusting this to you. Please. Mike, believing Nick's sincerity, agreed with a determined look on his face, saying, yes. That's Nick for you. Even if Mike went to apologize, Nick would shift all the blame onto him if the client didn't change their mind. Well, it was Mike's fault to begin with, so it served him right. About 3 hours later, Sam answered a call from somewhere and repeatedly apologized, saying, I'm very sorry. Everyone watched to see what was happening. After ending the call, he informed Nick with a weary tone. When Mike arrived at the client's company, he only made things worse, further infuriating Mr. Mason. He was demanding, get his boss here immediately. It was no wonder Sam was exhausted, dealing with such a call right after returning from training. What is that idiot doing? All right, Adam, you're coming with me. If sacrificing Mike didn't work, then I must be next. Normally, I'd want to refuse at all costs, but I saw an opportunity in this situation. If I can be of assistance, I'd be happy to join you. I obediently followed Nick, and we flew to New York. When we introduced ourselves at the reception, it became clear how serious the situation was, as the receptionist personally escorted us to the president's office. Angry voices leaked through the door, making both Nick and me uneasy. Excuse me. I'm Nick, the supervisor. I understand my subordinate has caused you trouble, and I deeply apologize. Nick, with his experience in the corporate world, knew enough to offer an apology before excuses. However, his customer service skills left much to be desired. I sighed as I saw Mike trembling like a small dog in the corner of the room. What kind of training are you giving your subordinates? Mr. Mason glared at Nick with a red face. The intensity of his gaze made even Nick take a step back. Regrettably, I joined this company only 2 years ago and was unaware of Mike's issues. I should have identified his shortcomings sooner. Indeed. I should have realized sooner. No sensible person would come to apologize and then give a lengthy presentation on the drawbacks of not using their in. Nick froze, his mouth slightly open. Suspecting the worst, I picked up the documents that had fallen to the floor. It seemed Mike hastily prepared these documents on the plane, listing the disadvantages. Disadvantage 1: if you change the venue for the company trip, employees might suspect it's for cost-cutting reasons, leading to a negative impression. Reading it aloud half-jokingly, Nick snatched the papers from my hand and checked the contents with a furious expression. Among the stack of documents was a receipt from a nearby convenience store's copy machine. I felt a pang of dread, hoping he hadn't shown the receipt as well. What do you think he said when I asked what kind of nerve he had to do this? I'm very sorry. Faced with the dire situation, Nick must have thought there was nothing left to do but apologize. In a voice smaller than I'd ever heard from him, he uttered words of apology. He said, I'm a Harvard graduate. I don't believe I said anything wrong. Mike, what have you done? Forgetting his plan to pin the blame on Mike, Nick yelled loudly, even in front of Mr. Mason. I didn't do anything wrong. You're still saying that? Look at him. Mike pointed at me with a shaking hand. I was assigned to headquarters in my 20s and now I'm a section chief. This guy only made it to headquarters at 42. Everything I've done proves I was right. So why are we losing the contract? Having said his piece, Mike collapsed to the floor. Of course. You were sent there because you had nowhere else to go. Mike never expected to hear such words from someone he looked down upon. He lunged at me, and Nick hurriedly stepped in to stop him. Mr. Thompson told me Mike is a quick thinker, and to take good care of him. There's no way he was pushed aside. Don't make things worse here. He didn't say quick thinker, he said only quick-witted, didn't he? I don't remember that part. I recalled the many troubles Mike caused when he was a newbie. When Mike was on the front line, his pride was so high that he never apologized to customers. Customer service, especially in our job, doesn't work alone. It brings both good and bad situations. If the front staff or housekeepers made mistakes, or the cleaning company didn't properly clean a room, one had to apologize to the customers regardless of personal fault. Mike, in such situations, would never apologize, insisting he wasn't at fault. This often angered customers, and as the front desk leader, I frequently had to apologize on his behalf. He caused complaints and disrupted operations, which is why he was quickly moved to headquarters. In departments where he didn't interact directly with customers, his quick thinking was beneficial and things went well. But it seemed his flaws were starting to show. Corporate reservations are supposed to be entered into the system by the sales representative. But a quick check yesterday revealed that more than 10 items were missing from the client's reservation. The handover document clearly stated what needed to be prepared. Why didn't you enter it into the system? Why do we have to give them special treatment? Filling rooms near the banquet hall, setting up all the food in advance. Specifying the brand of wine, they're too demanding. No wonder he always angered customers, I thought, feeling a headache coming on. Grouping them in rooms near the banquet hall is for our benefit too. It makes it easier for the staff to set up beds and serve breakfast since everyone's schedule is synchronized. As for the other requests, Mr. Mason suggested them to lighten our load. I didn't know that. Nick finally seemed to realize that Mike was the one who had angered the client. What did you say to them? I just told them we wouldn't give them special treatment anymore. We shouldn't waste effort on things that don't bring in money. I was utterly exasperated at his lack of understanding of customer service. Of course, we shouldn't comply with unreasonable demands. But carrying over successful practices from past stays makes customers feel remembered and enhances their experience. Good memories encourage repeat visits. That's part of our job. I looked down at Mike, who was sitting on the floor. In our job, nothing is a waste. Mr. Thompson likely moved you to the sales department, hoping you'd finally understand this. How do you think he feels now that you've failed to meet his expectations? Mike, tears in his eyes, fled the president's office. I was amazed he still hadn't apologized. You have it tough, Adam. It's okay, we're all employees of the same company. I deeply apologize for this disrespectful incident. Especially after all the care you've shown us. If it weren't for you, Adam, I really would have stopped staying here. When I heard you were moving to the sales department, I was willing to reconsider if you handled it. Seeing us talk so amicably, Nick's face contorted. Do you two know each other? Adam's service is excellent. I always requested him specifically. Normally, we don't accept specific staff requests, but we made an exception for Mr. Mason, adjusting my shifts accordingly. He had personally stayed at our hotel just before my transfer, and during casual conversation, I mentioned, I'm moving to the sales department soon. If I hadn't told him then, things could have been much worse. Please continue to take care of us. I look forward to it. On the return flight, Nick awkwardly offered me a can of beer. It's still working hours. Of course, I had no intention of forgiving him for a single beer. Nick might try to pin everything on Mike and avoid any consequences. While pondering this, a startling fact came to light. Nick, the tea bottles for the plan have arrived. I handed Nick a bottle labeled with our inn's name. They look good. What are you talking about? These are plastic bottles. I had assumed we would use the trendy, high-end bottling tea. But what arrived were ordinary plastic bottles of tea with customized labels. The only unique aspect was the label, which had the inn's name, making it look customized. Upon further investigation, I discovered that a substantial amount of money was set to be paid to the tea company. It was priced like bottling tea. Does this plastic bottle really cost $100 each? The tea inside is specially blended for us. The extra cost is for that. Wouldn't it be better to use another tea company? Or is there a specific reason we must use this one? As Nick continued to make excuses, I showed him a printed email. I informed the tea company's president, Mr. Mitchell, that we discovered irregular payments and he confessed. He said you two were high school classmates and planned to split the extra money. That idiot. Why did he confess? That's not important. You should worry about yourself, this could turn into a police matter. Opening the bottle cap, I suggested. How about calming down with this tea? It supposedly has a relaxing effect. Nick drank the tea frantically. In the following days, decisions were made about their fates. Mike was reassigned to the General Affairs Department, with no chance of transfer or promotion, as per Mr. Thompson's orders. As for Nick, since the payment to the tea company hadn't yet been made, he narrowly avoided legal trouble. Instead, he was encouraged to leave the company, and to avoid further complications, Nick submitted his resignation. Rumor has it that connections between HR departments have made it difficult for him to find new employment. Even though it was good to have those two gone, something unexpected happened in the sales department. Everyone became motivated and united in refining the 50th anniversary plan. In the end, my plan was adopted. We collaborated with the Tourist Information Center to provide personalized guides. The plan, tailored to the number of guests, was truly special for the 50th anniversary. Hey, is Adam's family coming to stay? I immediately booked that special plan for my family. Sam noticed it on the reservation list and quickly picked up on it. Yes, I'm inviting my father. That's great. I might invite my parents too. I lacked the courage to face my father just as Adam. But here, with the confidence Mr. Mason praised, I felt ready. The 50th anniversary plan was a perfect opportunity to reconnect with my father. I hoped to bring back the days when we could laugh together as we once did.